All right, well, I'll get started. I did do an audio check a little while ago, but if someone could just send a chat, one person from the audience could just send a note right now. Okay, Dawn says it sounds good, so that's okay. I have my face picture up right now, just so you can see who you're actually listening to. And I'm not going to keep this up the whole time, but I might pop it up once in a while. Sometimes it has bandwidth issues for some folks, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. On this title side, the title of this slide, I've kind of modified this presentation over the past month or so to be more inclusive about various types of content authoring beyond just online help. And I added a few new things, but you can also get that information, this information from slides which are on the link that is shown there, and I'll also make sure that Carolyn gets that after the presentation. So I'm Joe Walensky, and I'm happy to be presenting this to you. I primarily do a lot of evangelizing for software user assistance and contracting and consulting in that area. I'm doing a lot of contracting work through an organization called Blink in the Seattle area right now, which is a user experience firm. And this presentation, I think I'll talk for about 30 minutes, and I tend to talk a lot faster for webinars because I know people get bored with it. And you will have these slides available, as I mentioned, later on, although if you wanted to go to that link right now, you'd be able to find those. And then we have some questions afterward. You can shoot questions through the chat if you want, and if I notice those, I'll definitely react to that. And at the end, everybody's muted right now. If you have a microphone and you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat, and then if you have a microphone, we can put you on unmute and do it that way. So why don't we get started? I'm going to just turn this video component off for now, and just focus on the slides. And this work has been evolving over the past few years as I've done a lot of work with, primarily from a lot of work with mobile devices, where I recognize that there are a lot of, had to just change my ideas from 25 years of doing communication to be able to deal with the world of apps and just evolving software of all different types. And so that's essentially what I wanted to talk to you about today. And I did want to just start off by saying that I believe this is a major inflection point in the software industry that I haven't seen since 1989. So I've been doing technical communication since 1982, in the software industry since 1985, and 89 was the last time where I had to really change my ideas about how to do things. And so the reason I bring that up is that even though it seems like things are crazy right now with a lot of different presentation mechanisms that I'll talk about, this is just an important thing that things I think are going to stabilize in the next few years. But right now it's kind of crazy. That thing that happened in 1989, essentially that's when the graphical user interface really became popular, especially with the emergence of Windows 3 in 1989, and also along with that was the mouse. And we're in a situation where all the documentation that I previously written that was related to keyboards, now it had to reflect working with a mouse. And in those first couple of years, maybe till 1992, projects that I was involved in, we had to include information that made it very clear to help people understand how to do something with our software with the mouse, specifically as opposed to the keyboard, because it was this transition point. And after a few years, obviously that was less important, but there was a point in time where we had to really talk about the mouse, even though the GUI wasn't part of our software, it was part of the overall operating system. And I think that applies today, where we have this explosion of device types, and for 20 years now, the desktop has been the center point with a few variants. Then as the iPhone came in, there started to be more variants. The iOS Apple ecosystem is still relatively easy to be able to support because they force people forward with a relatively small number of devices. But Windows Phone is growing. Android, the number of device types is gigantic. And that's not even talking about the future, as more and more apps are going to be presented in non-traditional computing devices like the smart TV, where that's the only computer. It's embedded right in the frame of the screen, and then automobiles, where whether it's a good idea to be working with apps as you're zipping down the interstate, that ship has sailed, and all the major manufacturers are moving to support apps in the dash of their cars. I showed that Android figure on the last slide that showed 3,900 different device types, and that's not like hundreds of a Samsung Galaxy 4. That's like 3,900 individual type unique devices using Android, and the fragmentation is huge. And so that's an interesting problem in terms of supporting Android. However, Samsung is so dominant in the Android space right now that it's almost like you can talk about supporting the iPhone, the Windows Phone, and the Samsung phone, because the large majority of consumer devices using Android are put out by Samsung. But one of the things that I've been working with that's been an interesting problem is dealing with all the different interaction types that we have that have appeared in addition to these operating systems that I just mentioned. Obviously the desktop's around for 20-some years, and the mouse and the keyboard have been around. But just in the last few years, I've had to support touch for phones and tablets. Voice is emerging for the car dash home entertainment systems. The Kinect has hand gestures, and that the much hated TV remote, I don't think that's going anywhere. In fact, Sony came out with a media player remote that had a QWERTY keyboard. You can shake it, you can talk to it, you can mouse on it, and it very well be that in the near future our home entertainment systems, that actually might be what we use instead of a keyboard and a mouse. But getting to the issue about how do we support what we need to support, that's really what we have to be thinking about. And to me, it's important that we do that not just in an automated mechanism, that we can do it in a way that ends up making the information really useful to the people that are working with that device, that everything about what we do fits a particular device. And all these bullet points, I mean, there's so many different issues that we have to deal with. In one way or another, I think it's important to start thinking about how to be able to support these different challenges. Now, one of the areas that I've been working with is with a technique called responsive design. And I tend to think of that as specifically, it is most specifically dealing with the presentation of information, so that that it's adjusted intelligently for different device types, and so that includes the page layout and image sizes, navigation elements, and things like that. But more importantly, that we think about our content, the information types of our content. Well, maybe we have different information types for different device sizes, and this is something that comes out of my work on the UX side, where we see usability tests that an application that has a version for the desktop and then also has a version for, let's say, a phone. There's the technical side of it. There's the page layout side of it. But then the important consideration is that people may want to do different things with the application when it's on their phone than on desktop. So there's actually a functional difference, and that applies to us, because if people need help with working with an app, there's a very strong likelihood that their needs are going to be different when working with a small screen device than the desktop. And I think we really have to consider that and not think about the smartphone as just a smaller version of the desktop. Even if you can come up with good ways to immediately reduce the size of the presentation so that it's a small screen, that's not the only important issue. You really need to think about how people are using your app with those different devices. The idea of responsive design, I listed a link there that you can check out, which I think is a good summary. And I did a presentation for Adobe that was recorded that you can still find on adobe.com, specifically called Multi-Screen Help Offering, which gets into a very technical presentation of maybe one way to use responsive design to be able to effectively support devices. And I'm not going to get into all the details here because I think you can get on there. But what I had in that presentation, explains the idea of supporting the presentation in those different screen sizes from a single content repository, which you see represented in the slides. But as you look at the different screen captures, that presentation isn't just being smushed down. It's recognizing that as you get smaller screen devices, people may need less information and different pieces of information, and you use a combination of style sheets and media query to present the information needed on those different devices. The idea of just having one version that's presented on all different devices fails miserably, and you can set usability tests, and it's very clear that that doesn't work. And in that scheme that I talked about, essentially what you can do is set up buckets of devices that you want to support, so similar device types. For example, in the top left are devices that are phones. To the right of that are 10-inch tablets, or 9-inch, 7-inch tablets. Bottom right corner are 10-inch tablets, and to the left is a desktop. And so essentially, I can create 4 categories of device types and use 4 style sheets that can then transform the presentation of that information. And once I have those 4 style sheets, actually I don't have to do much work after that. As more devices appear that match the attributes of those 4 categories, they'll automatically be supported by the work that I've already done. And so it's a scheme that helps solve that issue of dozens of new devices every few weeks, hundreds of new devices every year, of the idea of thousands of different devices by the end of this decade. It's just impossible to support all of those individuals and help to be able to deal with that. And so knowing, stating needs, understanding those is important, and then also working with media query is a key part of that as well. Let me go back to that slide there. Now, I've been using this scheme for a couple of years now, and it scaled okay. So when the iPad came out, that ended up working and fitting with my 7-inch category that I'd already had. When HD in the 10-inch format came out, ended up fitting into that category without any changes. MacBook Pro, when that arrived, well, there have been other MacBook Pros, but a recent MacBook Pro was able to be supported by my desktop category. And so the funny thing is I did have a problem is with the iPhone 3G, which is the oldest iPhone, which actually doesn't fit into my phone category anymore. And but Apple's quickly moving away from supporting that. Probably in the next few months, very few people will have that device. Then media query is another key piece of it, which again I talked about in detail in that other presentation I referenced, and here's some additional links that are in the slides that will give you some more information about that. So that was kind of related to responsive design, which is about working with the page layout and the presentation elements to fit your content to different screen types. Then there's also adaptive content, which to me isn't the same. Now there's some articles where you'll see it as like one versus the other, and I don't see it that way at all. Responsive design, as I mentioned, is kind of on the presentation side. To me, adaptive content is really gets to task analysis, and that part I was talking about, of understanding the needs of users on different device types. And so I don't think it's possible to do task analysis on a single device anymore. If you're supporting your, let's say, your web-based application on a phone in addition to the desktop, you need to do a different task analysis. It's critical to do that. And you're going to find in your task analysis that you have different results. I would be very surprised if you didn't find that, because I definitely have. And related to that is context. When people are working with software with a mobile device, they're probably mobile. They may be walking through a train station trying to figure something out with the phone version of an app, whereas at the desktop they're sitting at their desk, and it's a whole different dynamic for that. And so that's a big part of it. And then on small screen devices, I think you really need to look at individual word choices at a much more critical level than for the desktop. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at software that's on small screen devices, the words on those buttons have to carry a lot more information to the user. And so early on, and you want to be part of those early design meetings so that you can contribute to that, because I find so many buttons that just don't use the right word, and people get stuck. And there's just not the same amount of room for embedded help information in the user interface. And by coming up with the best possible words for the limited screen real estate, you can really make an impact. It can really, for instance, getting someone who believes that it's important to spend time at that granular word level to think through, to design that. In terms of specific authoring techniques, this is really the core of what I wanted to go over today, the authoring part of that. And so these are all the different categories that I want to talk about for the balance of my chatting with you. And by the way, let's see, I'm monitoring the chat, so if you have a question, type that in there and I can address that. So first area I want to talk about is interaction verbs, which gets into that first slide that I was talking about this being an inflection point with the different interaction types that we have. And I think right now it's important, even if you're just starting to support things other than the desktop, to start thinking about what your strategy is to be moving forward in terms of how to write instructions for different device types. And in my experience, I've run into essentially two ways to work with this. And for a given client, I think you're going to end up going one way or the other. You could have a mix, but I think you're going to want to look at going with either a generic approach or a custom approach. And so with the generic approach, if you're doing, so when you have help topics with procedures and such, with explanations about how to do things, the generic approach is to use verbs that are device neutral, to change the widget, select preferences, scroll to view additional items, move the unused items to the trash. Whereas with custom, you're going to go back to something like that scheme that I mentioned earlier, where you're using cascading style sheets or some other type of transformation, and you're using a custom vocabulary. So if somebody's using a phone device, a touch device, they're going to see tap, double tap, flick. If they're using a desktop with a mouse, they're getting clicks and drags. If they're using a Connect device, they see hover and wave. If it's voice, then it's saying things to them in a certain way. And the thing is, the custom version is a lot more difficult to implement than the generic version because it has a kind of a high amount of single source planning and then authoring that you have to get involved with, and it's more tool intensive. However, the generic approach, the downside to that, although it's easier, you have just one version for all devices, is that when you're working with work with different devices, sometimes when it's really hard to come up with generic terms depending on how that device is set up. For example, on some touch devices, a double tap does an action that you don't really have generic language for that people are familiar with. And so it can get tough. When you're talking about something even more new, like hand gestures, like from the Connect, which is going to be more prevalent now that it's going to be built into every Xbox, for example. And then you have a term like hover. So hover is select. That's the equivalent of select for Microsoft hand gestures. But then if you have a for the Connect, select, let's say, to change the widget settings, select preferences, well, they might not recognize that select and hover are the same thing. So, in fact, Microsoft actually uses an icon for hover in some of their documentation. So, this is something that you have to figure out right now. We've already gone down this road, but it's time to start thinking about what approach might work for you. And it is important. Let's look at this example here. which is from Windows 8 Help Topics. So it's from the Windows 8 operating system. Both of these topics were written by Microsoft documentation teams, but they're for different utility apps within Windows 8. And look at the difference of the one up in the top left and the one in the bottom right. And so up in the top left, the author says, okay, swipe in. So the touch language, swipe in from the right edge of the screen, tap settings, and then tap change PC settings. So that author has decided to make touch the predominant version. And then in parens below that is the mouse version. And so there's a very clear point of view there about what's important, that it should be touch, and then below that keyboard. Whereas you look down to the bottom one, and you see that in each sentence it says tap or click, so it's using both verb types. And so a different point of view. And I would think that they would want to be consistent about that. And then the thing that's lacking in both of these cases is that it's only dealing with the mouse or a tap. But Microsoft Windows 8 is, ostensibly is supposed to be device independent, which would include voice control, keyboard control, stylus control. And so by using tap or click, you're actually limiting what that means if somebody was using a different type of device. Now, this slide here, this just kind of shows an example of what the output would be like if you're using a single source scheme and conditional text to be able to do that custom orientation. So this is actually based on a prototype project, but other tools can do the same thing. Publisher, and so on. But what you see up in the top left, that procedure is set up for a laptop or desktop thing where there's a lot of screen real estate. Moving over to the phone, information has been deprecated, so the feedback statement is hidden in that Chicago, which is a GIF. The choice was to hide that. Not that hiding images has to be done for the phone, but just as an example that in this case it is automatically from view, and then the one below is for a Microsoft Connect style procedure where the icons are put in for hover instead of the generic select. And so here you really needed to have a tool to be able to implement the scheme from a single source content repository into these different custom variants. And one of the things that I find myself doing in advance of a project is build a command language interaction table. And this is just something that I'll do in Excel. Essentially, I create variable names for the different verbs, and then the different columns are what my actual word term is going to be for those different interaction types. And so you can see I have a generic column, and then I've determined what words I want to use for those different interaction types. And then that's built into the authoring tool that I use, so that when I know I want to output a certain help file, and that is definitely going to be presented on a touch screen, then it's going to automatically use those verbs from the touch column. And I have another more technical, deeper presentation of this, again, on adobe.com. They support a lot of these presentations. It's freely available, so you can find it. It's got the title there in this slide, and that just talks about this whole idea of these verb variable interaction schemes. So I'm not going to get into that right now. An interesting and helpful resource is something that came out a couple of years ago from Luke Wroblewski called the Touch Gesture Reference Guide, which just kind of really gives you an introduction to all the different types of interactions just within the touch domain for different platforms. So far I've just been talking about the different interaction types, but here we can see that even for the touch interaction type, there's differences across different platforms. So it actually becomes even more complicated to be able to deal with this than what I've talked about so far. Here's a chart that I put together that shows the terms for different platforms, and you can see that fortunately, for the most part, the platforms have standardized on certain terms, that are the same across the board. But there are terms that are different, and I still don't have definite ways that I've solved that in terms of how to deal with that. This kind of gets into another the generic custom thing, but in this situation, it's, all right, well, you could say, okay, so so many people design for iOS first, and so I'm just going to use all the iOS language. And then the Windows Phone will be just like iOS. And so obviously that's an easier thing to do development-wise, but if somebody has a Windows Phone and Microsoft is promoting a certain term, like pan instead of drag, well, they're not going to be familiar with using drag. So, that's something, it definitely merits some discussion. And then this is just another chart I put together showing more language interaction, more vocabulary changes. I mean, Windows 8, I've only just started working with documentation for Windows 8 apps. But Windows 8 introduced this whole new set of touch gestures that aren't anything like what you had in for the iPhone or Windows Phone or Android. And I'm still trying to figure out how to deal with that. And some of them are somewhat complicated, which gets back to that whole original 1989, I can't just tell people how to use my product. I have to tell people how to use my product with Windows 8. And they can't really rely on Microsoft having adequately migrated people so that they know how to do all the things that are in Windows 8. For example, if my application is doing something important that's located in the charms. And that's getting modified a little bit in the upcoming 8.1, but just as an example. So if I put something in charms, I'm not sure right now most people know how to get to charms. And so if I'm doing my documentation for a Windows 8 Metro or Modern app, I'm going to very clearly explain to them where to find my control and how to reveal it in the charms. And going along with that inflection point thing is this example for the interaction type of near-field communications, or NFC. In Wired magazine, there was an ad for Alexis that used the near-field communication where they put a chip inside the page, and if you put your phone against the page, it will automatically send a message to the phone and have it display the Lexus car page on the phone's browser. But the most prominent part of the ad was showing a person how to actually orient and use their device to get that interaction happen. And if banking starts to use NFC for transactions and things like that, again, we're probably going to have to explain to people about NFC in addition to our own software. And this is just some examples from screenshots from iOS apps, just showing some different ways that companies are dealing with presenting those interaction types. And some apps are using a very literal representation of what to do by having the hand and showing hand motions. That's probably going to go away in 2 or 3 years, but I think it makes a lot of sense for some of these apps to do that right now, to actually show the motion that people are going to need to do to accomplish a certain activity. And in the second edition of a book that I'm working on about mobile user assistance, I'm trying to promote what I call 4 C's of user assistance design, which is contextual, that information is directly in the context of whatever the person is trying to do, conforms to the specific type of user interface that they're within, which may change widely, conditional, that it only appears when it's needed, and that it's very concise, and I'll kind of talk about those in a little bit more detail. The item that I put out there conforms. So the second C, that whatever kind of help you put together for an app conforms to that, the app's user interface, and this is a representation of that. So here's 6 screenshots of help files for 6 different apps. And just look at that, and they're all iPhone apps. And just reflect on what you see there about the variety and the way that they're put together from maybe traditional help authoring in, let's say, the Windows platform. And one of the things that you might have noticed is, well, that things are very colorful. Things are, help is implemented in a variety of different ways. There's literal arrows and things like that. There's more traditional style procedures. But if you look at the apps, one of the things that you would see then is that each one of these help screens looks like the rest of the app. So it's not like some procedure that doesn't have any reference to what else you're seeing there. And so this is a really important thing, I think, for our community to kind of internalize, is that the way that we've been doing online help for the desktop, where we have this separate, well, in a lot of cases we have this separate window with help topics, or even if it's embedded, it looks like procedure documentation. That's not at all what people are expecting in these small screen devices. They really expect that information to be concise, to appear just when they need it, and to not take them out of the engagement that they otherwise have with that app. And so having somebody click a help button to go to a help topic that's in the Safari browser on the mobile iPhone is just exactly the wrong way to do help for these small screen devices, and I'll talk more about that. With larger screen devices, you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of screen real estate. You can put more information there, and you could actually fit a traditional help window in tablet-size screens, but again, if you're supporting an app that's in the app ecosystem like iOS or Android or Windows Phone, I still don't think you want to do that. I still think you want to go back to the 4 C's and be more in this native crafted environment than using kind of a standard automated browser output. And this is just an example of some of the things I tried to do on a project a couple of years ago, and just rethinking what it meant to do procedural information on a small screen device. And kind of the bottom line is that it just looks very different, and it's much more concise. And I just found that below 7 inches, you really have to treat that as a different case. So that whole set of phones, including up through the large note phones or the phablets, you really have to custom craft that content, and it doesn't even fit into those schemes I talked about that well. Those single source schemes that I talked about. I think you almost have to deal with real small screen content as a separate use case. And now another thing related to small screens is that navigation elements don't work well at all. And again, I've been working on projects at a company that does a lot of testing using usability technologies of small screen devices, and for the main app, app developers try to get away from hierarchical navigation as much as possible. I mean, it just kills usability when people have to search around through menus on small screen devices. And if people don't want to use tables of contents or menus for the app itself, they definitely don't want to see a menu or a table of contents for help information. And so even though many of I got to put myself on screen for this, because this is really important. I work with a lot of authoring tools. I love my authoring tools. But just because authoring tools are making it possible to get a table of contents similar to your desktop version and make it a version that technically can work on an iPhone doesn't mean that's a good thing. They don't work. They don't work. I don't know any other way to say it. They don't work. And if you're sure, then test that out yourself, but they don't. And you're using any of the products that I mentioned earlier or other ones, and a conversion tool, something that they call mobile, and they have an ability to make a table of contents for that mobile device. Don't use it. It doesn't work. And I'm just so firmly, this is just really a really important point. Don't do it. And I just wanted to say don't do it. Now, then, what's the solution to that? If you have enough, if you're trying to present so much information on a small screen device that you need a table of contents, then there's a problem with your app that you have to bring to the developers, or you have to rethink how you're presenting information to your users, and if in fact you're holding on to too much of that content, and maybe you just have to really edit until you just get down to the most important essence of what you need to get across, and then test that. And I have a couple of examples here of navigation that was kind of intelligently reduced for products. So on the eBay version, the desktop table of contents and the desktop and the mobile table of contents are actually very different. You can get to some of the same information, but the two TOCs are redesigned. So they're recognizing that people have different needs. On the right, you have the Amazon TOC for the desktop and also for mobile. And in that case, the mobile version has been deprecated significantly. The number of options that somebody's likely to want to learn about using the mobile device, they've decided is much less than on the desktop, and so their TOC reflects that. Now, first-time user experience is an area, especially with small screen devices, that I think we can still contribute in by doing good tutorials, just not tutorials like we're used to when we have a lot of screen real estate. But I think most apps can benefit by having some type of tutorial at the start. Because even with apps, people have a lot of questions at the very start of using an application. And if you can get those questions answered right off the bat, then there's very few questions that people have over time with the app. Except for two cases. One is when people start wanting to learn with advanced features, and then you might want to pop up some information to help them with that. And if an app update has an update, in which case you'll want to contextually conditionally give them some information so that they know how to work with that new feature. You know, voice is an interesting interaction type that we're just starting to get some tools to be able to work with. I'm really interested in the latest thing that Google has come out with Android in terms of making it possible for me to have voice scripts that are built into the software so that I can respond to questions, vocal questions, through the system to my users and provide them with a voice response. iOS Siri doesn't come anywhere close to what we need. New Google stuff might. Windows Phone has a voice API, which might. Automotive manufacturers are all working on voice controls, but there's a lot of issues with those, and you can kind of see some of the user assistance in automotive voice control through this article that I wrote that you can find on my Walensky website. And that it even applies to games as well. Just when I was watching my son work with a game, I noticed that the language, that with a controlled vocabulary, he was forced to use words that I think the documentation person put into the system that didn't actually match the types of words that he wanted to use while he was playing the game. And so it ends up taking him out of, he's no longer immersed in the game. Suddenly he's thinking of these documentation-specific words that somebody decided he needed to use. And then it's just kind of an overall summary of my points. And so I recommend looking at some of those detailed presentations on adobe.com and then just reflect a little bit on how you want to move forward in supporting these different interaction types. And most importantly, recognizing that you really need to think of small screen devices in a different way if your apps are going to be supporting that. All right, well, that brings me to the end of the part that I wanted to talk about, and I actually talked a little bit longer than I thought I would, so I apologize for that. But are there any questions anybody want to toss into the chat for me to respond to? I'll just give you a minute if you want to think about it and type in a question, or again, you can get. I'll give Carolyn the link to these slides. I do want to mention we have a conference coming up on the East Coast in Newport, Rhode Island, and we haven't done an event in that area for quite a while. So hopefully, you know, I think it'll be a fun time, and we have some good speakers, and should be some good networking. So you might want to check that out and see if it might be possible for you or your colleagues to participate in that. Make a trip a little bit up north to visit for that. Also, you might want to check out my personal website where I have a lot of information, blogs and articles and reviews and things like that that are available. The resource directory is available. You might want to check that out. And if you want to get added to the mailing list, you can do that. Let's see. We had a message chat from Bruce Curley. Given the number of devices and the differences in sizes and use, what is the one principle you would encourage to guide creating for these multiple devices? Well, so I guess the most important is one that I mentioned a bit, which is that I think there's definitely a different use case for any device that you're thinking of as a mobile device. And because I've found that people just interact with them different and they want information in a very different way. And when they're mobile, obviously they're moving. They have less of their tools available. They have less of their focus and concentration available. And I think you need to test that. And if you think you're just going to be taking your authoring tool and using their mobile conversion option, and that's going to appear on their smartphone, well, it is. But now actually test and observe somebody using that and see whether they're actually still able to get any useful information out of that. So that would be, if I was picking the number one item, that would be it. All right, well, I don't see any more things in there, so I'll send some information to Carolyn about this and make sure you get links to the slides. And other than that, I appreciate your attention during this. I hope you got some useful info, and good luck with all of your activities for the future. Thank you very much.